I had previously talked about the UN Human Rights Chief, Michelle Bachelet, her trip to Xinjiang, China. I had made a video about this before she actually went. She has gone there, she has returned, she has written a preliminary statement, and there will be a following report. Now, I'm talking about this because in the aftermath of the trip, the only people talking about it now, the people getting the media spotlight, specifically because of the lopsided, politically motivated nature of the Western media, the only people getting any sort of attention now about this issue are these US government-funded fronts posing as human rights groups. They're attacking her office, the UN, because they didn't just repeat all of the baseless accusations that these groups have been making for years and years and have never backed up with any evidence. I want to show you this UN news article. UN rights chief concludes China trip with promise of improved relations. I think it's safe to say that if she witnessed all kinds of genocide taking place, that might have been mentioned in the headline. It was not, because there was no genocide taking place in Xinjiang. The article says at the end of her official visit to China, the first such trip in 17 years, UN rights chief Michelle Bachelet announced new areas of engagement between her office and the Chinese government on rights issues, and summarized many rights issues raised during her 6-day May mission. It also says during her mission, Ms. Bachelet spoke with a range of government officials, several civil society organizations, academics, and community and religious leaders. That was all in China. In addition, she met several organizations online ahead of the visit on issues relating to Xinjiang province, Tibet, Hong Kong, and other parts of China. Where do you think those organizations are located? They're located in Washington, in Virginia, in London, because they are Western-backed fronts posing as human rights organizations, making baseless accusations against China as part of a way of undermining China internationally and allowing the US to have some sort of pretext to continue trying to isolate and undermine China on the global stage. Now, the article continues. It says, in Xinjiang, home to the Muslim Uyghur minority, Ms. Bachelet raised questions and concerns about the application of counterterrorism and de-radicalization measures and their broad application, and encouraged the government to undertake a review of all counterterrorism and de-radicalization policies to ensure they fully comply with international human rights standards and are not applied in an arbitrary and discriminatory way. And I think that is a fair statement. They're acknowledging that what is happening in Xinjiang is a process of counterterrorism and de-radicalization. And anyone familiar with what has been going on in Xinjiang over the years knows that that is exactly what China is doing. Is that process perfect? No. If the UN can give the Chinese government some sort of insight or some sort of framework to use to iron out the imperfections, then that is good. That is good for China. That is good for everyone involved. Nothing in this article mentions genocide. The UN news article, this is how it ends. It says, the rights chief praised China's tremendous achievements in alleviating poverty and eradicating extreme poverty, 10 years ahead of its target date. The country, she added, has gone a long way towards ensuring protection of the right to health and broader social and economic rights, thanks to the introduction of universal health care and almost universal unemployment insurance scheme. A number of other developments in the country were welcomed by Ms. Bachelet, including legislation that improves protection for women's rights and work being done by NGOs to advance the rights of LGBTI people, people with disabilities, and older people. The UN rights chief underscored the important role that China has to play at a regional and multilateral level, and noted that everyone she met on her visit, from government officials, civil society, academics, diplomats, and others, demonstrated a sincere willingness to make progress on the promotion and protection of human rights for all. Again, if there were some sort of genocide taking place in Xinjiang, I think she would have mentioned it somewhere in this this article. It would have mentioned it somewhere. Also in the article, it said, "To those who have sent me appeals, asking me to raise issues or cases with the authorities, I have heard you," she declared. "I will continue to follow up on such issues and instances of concern on a sustained basis." And this is in response to all of these fake US government-funded organizations that are trying to coerce the UN into just repeating these baseless claims being made about the Chinese government in Xinjiang, that there's some kind of genocide taking place and that China needs to be isolated on the global stage and dealt with, essentially. This is, I'm going to say this now, I've said it before and I will say it again. Xinjiang genocide is to China what WMDs were to Iraq. It is just a pretext to create an excuse for the US to antagonize another nation that it doesn't like and wants removed out of its way. And China, more than any other nation, is a threat to US hegemony worldwide. It is a large, prospering country. It will surpass the US economically, and the US will do anything in the world to stop that, including making up stories about China. Now, who do you think some of these organizations were? They're organizations like the World Uyghur Congress, the Uyghur Human Rights Project. All of these are funded by the US government through the National Endowment for Democracy. I want to show you this right here. This is the NED's official website. Xinjiang, East Turkestan. The only people who call Xinjiang East Turkestan are separatists. And this acknowledges the role the US government through the NED plays in promoting separatism in Xinjiang, China. This is why there was violence and terrorism and radicalization in the first place that China now has to undo, that the UN is referring to in that article. It's because of the US. The US created this problem. The US created this problem, and for years there was deadly terrorism tearing through Xinjiang, but not just Xinjiang. It spread across all of China. It spread across all of Asia. There was a bombing in 2015 carried out by Uyghur extremists right here in Bangkok, Thailand, right where I live. And then thousands of these extremists went to Syria to join the ranks of Al-Qaeda and ISIS and fight and kill people there. It was a huge problem. The US was backing it. They're still backing it. They're still backing these organizations. Also, organizations like Amnesty International. This is not a Xinjiang specific organization, but they are also playing a role. Also is the New York Times. Let's do Amnesty International first. This was China. UN visit falls short of addressing crimes against humanity in Xinjiang. What if there were no crimes against humanity taking place in Xinjiang? Maybe that's why they fell short. What does this Amnesty International article say? It says, "The time has come for the OHCHR to publicly acknowledge the scale and gravity of human rights violations being committed by the Chinese government. The High Commissioner should release the long-awaited report on Xinjiang and present the findings at the next meeting of the UN Human Rights Council in June. Failure to release a report that sufficiently addresses crimes against humanity in the region would amount to a betrayal of the victims and their families. Their continued lack of urgency puts the credibility of the High Commissioner's office at stake." This is Amnesty International trying to coerce the UN to simply repeat their anti-China propaganda. That's all that is. I challenge Amnesty International and every other group out there to show me actual evidence of genocide taking place in Xinjiang. I have not seen it. I've read through every report that they've ever put out, hundreds and hundreds of pages of unsubstantiated claims, all based on hearsay. There's no physical evidence. How do you imprison 1 million people? And how do you genocide an entire race of people and leave not a trace of evidence? How do you do that? Well, you can do it if you're not actually doing it, and people are just saying that you're doing it. That's how it's possible. Just like it was possible for Iraq to have WMDs when they actually didn't. The UN is supposed to be impartial. It's not supposed to be influenced by China. It's also not supposed to be influenced by the United States and these organizations that it funds and backs and promotes. Here's the New York Times. Wow, look, they even used the same picture. And it says, As UN rights chief visits China, some fear she'll become part of the spin. Michelle Bachelet's tour includes Xinjiang, where China has been accused of genocide. It's not proven. There's no evidence. It's just an accusation. The terms of her visit are unclear, and critics say Beijing is using her for propaganda. And this is before she finished her trip. She has now finished her trip. But let's see what the New York Times had to say anyway. In recent years, the Chinese authorities have vastly expanded the police presence in Xinjiang, destroyed mosques, and rounded up religious leaders and intellectuals. Residents have been enlisted in work programs that experts say amount to forced labor. The United States has labeled the repression as genocide. Chinese officials have denied the accusation, saying their sweeping campaign in Xinjiang is aimed at guiding Uyghurs and other minorities away from religious extremism. And in a previous video on this topic, the link will be in the video description below, I went over BBC articles where they listed all of the horrific terrorism unfolding in Xinjiang because of extremists, Uyghur extremists. They were killing Han Chinese police and military, but also civilians. They were also killing other Uyghurs. They were destroying their own society. And they were doing it backed and promoted by the US. And I'm going to show you US State Department documents here proving that this is the sort of thing that they've been doing in China for decades, targeting ethnic minorities and using them as an armed proxy against the Chinese government and against Chinese territorial integrity. All throughout this New York Times article, not once do they talk about that terrorism that even the BBC had reported on previously. They don't talk about thousands of Uyghurs traveling to Syria to join Al-Qaeda and ISIS. They don't talk about the bombing here in Bangkok in 2015. They don't mention any of that. And this is what the US does. They stir up trouble, and then when a country reacts to it, they just show you the reaction, and they leave out all of the context. They never talk about what provoked that reaction. And that is how they can make a country reacting to terrorism look like it's just irrationally throwing people into prison. The New York Times characterizes Michelle Bachelet's trip by saying, Uyghurs overseas, Western governments, and human rights groups have warned that Ms. Bachelet risks becoming a tool for Beijing's efforts to whitewash its crackdown. China has portrayed the trip as a chance for Ms. Bachelet to view Xinjiang unencumbered by Western biases and see the success of its efforts to promote the region's economy while preventing terrorism and religious extremism. That is a fact. That is what China has actually done. You have to ask yourself, why is it the US, it says Western governments here in the New York Times article. Why are Western governments, and more specifically, why is the US so interested in what's going on in Xinjiang, China? Ask yourself that. When the US was faced with a terrorist problem, they waged a global war on terrorism. It spanned 20 years. They killed millions of people, displaced millions of people, tens of millions of people. They've destroyed entire countries in the process, using this pretext of a war on terror. They haven't lifted anyone out of poverty. I mean, they have created multiple failed states, Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan. They're still killing people in northern Africa. Their drone program was killing people around the globe, 90% of which were innocent civilians. The man, Daniel Hale, who exposed that, they threw him in jail. The war in Iraq alone, 2003 invasion of Iraq, that was the worst crime against humanity of the 21st century. That was the US that did that. They lied, deliberately lied about weapons of mass destruction to serve as a pretext to invade Iraq. They occupied the country, and in the process, they killed 1 million Iraqis. They displaced tens of millions. That is the worst crime against humanity. Even if what they're saying about China was true, which it isn't, it would still pale in comparison to what the US did in Iraq alone as part of their 20-year war on terror. Think about that. What is this really about? Why is the US really why are they really getting involved in Xinjiang? This is them trying to undermine and isolate China on the global stage. And this has been going on forever, for decades. I want to show you this first document from the US State Department's Office of the Historian. Courses of Action in Vietnam. This is 1965. It says the February decision to bomb North Vietnam and the July approval of Phase 1 deployments make sense only if they are in support of a long-run United States policy to contain communist China. And all throughout this statement, and the link will be in the video description below, that's all they talk about, is how big of a threat China poses to the US and its hegemony over Asia, a region of the planet the US is not even located in, and how there's all of these different fronts that they can contain China along, including Southeast Asia, Japan and Korea, and India and Pakistan. And they're still doing that to this day. How about this one? US State Department Office of the Historian, 1964, review of Tibetan operations. It says, the CIA Tibetan activity consists of political action, propaganda, and paramilitary activity. Paramilitary means the US is giving them guns so that they can go into China and kill people. The purpose of the program at this stage is to keep the political concept of an autonomous Tibet alive within Tibet and among foreign nations, principally India, and to build a capability for resistance against possible political developments inside communist China. This whole Free Tibet movement was a creation of the CIA. It served to advance US geopolitical objectives, had absolutely nothing to do with actually helping the people of Tibet. They were just using them to carve off Chinese territory, to undermine China, politically, internally, and also to undermine them internationally. They're doing the exact same thing in Xinjiang with the Uyghurs now. They've been doing it for years. It's the same process from the 1960s all the way until today. And we just saw the US State Department and an old document from the 1960s saying they need to contain communist China. And then we remember Joe Biden very recently. Biden says, this is Reuters, Biden says China won't surpass US as global leader on his watch. This is the same mentality. We're not going to allow China to surpass us. We will contain China. But think about how irrational that is and how impractical it is. China has 4 or 5 times the population of the US. They graduate millions more in key fields like science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. They have world-class infrastructure. They have a massive industrial base. Why wouldn't they surpass the US? What would the reason be for them not surpassing the US? It makes absolutely no sense. And how is the US going to compete with China? The Reuters article says, US President Joe Biden said he would prevent China from passing the United States to become the most powerful country in the world, vowing to invest heavily to ensure America prevails in the race between the world's 2 largest economies. This is the US all but saying Chinese people are inferior. It doesn't matter if there's 4 or 5 times more Chinese people than Americans. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what infrastructure they have, what advantages they have economically. It doesn't matter how much resources they have access to. They can't surpass us because they're just plain inferior. We will stay number 1. Of course, that's not true. Everyone is equal. People in China are hardworking, just like the people in America. There's just more of them. Their government is doing a much better job creating the basic necessities they need to be successful. Infrastructure, healthcare, education, things the US has really been falling down on the job regarding lately. So if the US can't compete head-to-head with China, how are they actually going to stop China from surpassing them? Well, of course, they'll lie, like they're lying about Xinjiang and Tibet and Hong Kong and everywhere else, about the South China Sea, about debt trap diplomacy, everything along those lines. They will cheat, excluding Chinese companies from markets by coercing its allies, in Europe, telling them, you're not going to do business with Huawei. We're going to exclude them from the markets and give ourselves an unfair advantage because we're just eliminating the competition. And we'll make up some security pretext to justify it. Terrorizing, subverting, bullying. This is what the US is doing to compete with China. The riots, the violent riots in Hong Kong, the terrorism in Xinjiang, the Tibet activities sponsored by the CIA, all of this to subvert, destabilize, bleed China. For decades, they've been doing this. That is how the US is competing against China. That is the truth. And this Xinjiang genocide narrative is just one of several moving parts. Now, I want to point one more thing out here. I want to point out why the UN human rights chief didn't see any genocide in Xinjiang, because there isn't any. And that's not just the Chinese government saying that. I want to show you this article from AP. This is from last year. Terror and tourism, Xinjiang eases its grip, but fears remain. And if you look through this article, I mean, you will see mosques, you'll see imams in a government-funded school teaching them how to be imams, vocational training, bustling economic activity, Uyghur culture being celebrated. Go through this article, learn how to read between the lines, because even though they're admitting that there is no genocide, there's no evidence of it. I'm going to read a little bit of this article to you. But they'll still try to sell the idea that still, even though we can't see it, even though there's no evidence, it must still somehow be going on. So this is what the AP article says. It says, the razor wire that once rings public buildings in China's far northwestern Xinjiang region is nearly all gone. Gone too are the middle school uniforms and military camouflage and the armored personnel carriers rumbling around the homeland of the Uyghurs. Gone are many of the surveillance cameras that once glared down like birds from overhead poles, and the eerie, eternal wail of sirens in the ancient Silk Road city of Kashgar. Uyghur teenage boys, once a rare sight, now flirt with girls over pounding dance music at rollerblading rinks. One cab driver blasted Shakira as she raced through the streets. 4 years after Beijing launched a brutal crackdown that swept up to 1 million or more, they can never nail down that number because they have no actual evidence substantiating that claim. That's why there's no actual specific number, 1 million or more. Uyghurs and other mostly Muslim minorities into detention camps and prisons. Its control of Xinjiang has entered a new era. Chinese authorities have scaled back many of the most draconian and visible aspects of the region's high-tech police state. The panic that gripped the region a few years ago has subsided considerably, and a sense of normality is creeping back in. So if this is what AP saw a year ago, why isn't that what the UN human rights chief would have saw this year, visiting Xinjiang this year? This is the Western media telling you that if a UN human rights chief visited Xinjiang, she's not going to see genocide. They're telling you in their own article right here. So again, I'm gonna circle back to this. Xinjiang genocide is to China as WMD's was to Iraq. It is just a pretext for the US to antagonize, to undermine, and to attempt to destroy a rival nation that it wants out of the way. And it wants China out of the way more than any other nation on earth. It is the only nation right now poised to surpass the US. The President of the United States himself said he will not allow China to surpass the US. They have no legal, rational, legitimate, constructive way of stopping that. So they're going to do unconstructive things to stop it. They are going to lie about China, undermine China, fund terrorism, and then blame China for cracking down on terrorism. They're going to poison its neighbors against them. This is going to continue. This goes far beyond just this Xinjiang narrative. And like I said, if you understand that the Western media is lying about, say, Ukraine, the situation in Ukraine. I mean, we see how they're lying. They said Ukraine was winning. Now they say Ukraine is losing. They didn't know because Ukraine lied to them. They're lying about them lying to you. They're also most certainly lying about China. This is not the first thing or the only thing they're telling the truth about. And if you are willing to believe the Western media about China while knowing full well they're lying about Ukraine, then you have to ask yourself what prejudices you might be harboring that lead you to do that, because that's irrational. They're obviously also lying about China. So ask yourself why you're willing to believe those lies when you will not tolerate them and you will look past them in regards to other places around the world like Ukraine. If you thought this video was useful, please like and share. Think about subscribing. It's free to do. It helps the channel grow. Check the video description below for all of the links that I referenced, as well as for other places you can find and follow my work, like on Telegram. I am On Telegram every day. I update it several times a day. Check it out. It's in the video description. Just, scroll down, find it, click on it, and go there. I'm also on Rumble and Odyssey. In the video description are also ways you can help support my work. You could do that through Buy Me a Coffee, through Patreon, and also through PayPal. To everyone who has been helping out, whether it's one-time donations, month-to-month memberships, or even if you're just helping share my work with others, I appreciate that. I could not do this work without that help, so thank you. And as always, thank you for watching.